Welcome to Women in Leadership Talk, where you'll hear from successful women who are empowering other women with their stories of adversity, resiliency, and success. And here is your host, Vicki Bradley, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thank you once again for chiming in. We always have amazing individuals on our show, and we love that you keep chiming in to listen to what each of these individuals are sharing with us. And today, I have been so excited about having this guest on the show. So today, welcome Lola Reid Allin. She is a former airline transport pilot, and I'm going to get into more of that in a minute. But Lola, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Vicki, it's my pleasure and my honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. And I was saying to Lola just before we popped in here to the podcast, I have been so excited about this interview because her energy just literally it jumps off the page. And this is our first time ever talking in person. So I'm super excited to have her share that passion and that energy with you. So without further ado, let me give you a little bit of feedback on Lola so you know why I've invited her. She has a very unique and interesting background, fearless from what I can tell. So she, as I mentioned, she's a former airline transport pilot. She's a pilot examiner and the first female flight instructor at two flight schools, one in British Columbia here in Canada and the other in Ontario, Canada. She's the first woman to fly the Twin Otter for a scheduled air service commemorated on the Wall of Women in Aviation History at the Bush Plane Museum in Sault Ste. Marie, and the first female supervisor employed by de Havilland. Did I say that right? De Havilland?
Yes.
De Havilland Flight Safety. In addition to that, she is a scuba dive master, which blew me away when I read that because I'm like, really, where are you diving? And I mean, I know Canada, we have a lot of ocean around us, but I was like, where's she really diving at? And she corrected me. She's also an award-winning author and photographer whose work has appeared in many notable local, national, and international publications, including National Post, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, National Geographic, Santa Fe Center for Photography, Verge Magazine, and Grapevine Magazine. So that's all I'm going to say because now I'm going to turn it over to Lola because I want her to share with us, okay, first of all, how did you get into aviation? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Well, it was something I always wanted to do. I was inspired as a child by a TV show called Sky King. You can still watch it on YouTube, but I watched it even as reruns, and it was pretty inspiring and it was fun. And then I was really inspired to go flying as a career when I did go flying for the very first time in 1962. My parents decided to take us out west for a family reunion, and I just thought it was the most exciting thing ever. And of course, it was an event. People did not hop on airplanes like they do today. I mean, I was all dressed up in this posh frock that, had a lacy over skirt on it. And it was peaches and pale green, a mint green, and, big bow. And I remember walking across the ramp in Toronto, which was then called Malton, walking across the ramp and looking way, way up into this airplane and this big steel stairway that was going up, and it was just awe-inspiring. And the flights, 2 flights, you couldn't even fly nonstop Toronto to Regina. I think for 2 reasons. Regina wasn't a very big hub, particularly, and really the planes weren't really capable of going all that distance. So we had to switch in Winnipeg for an even smaller turboprop. And it was so exciting. I just loved it. And then, but I was pretty discouraged by my father, who was very bitter about life and didn't want children to begin with, and discouraged by my mother, who at the time I thought she just didn't want me to succeed or want the best for me. But in fact, she was kind of trying to protect me from what she knew as an all-male environment. And it was coming from her pain, I guess.
Sure. Her experiences.
Because she had been educated, and being educated, an educated woman in well, it would have been during the war years, was unusual. She had worked for the Canadian National Railway, which was not unheard of. But when you worked for that crown company or any crown company, if you were married, you had to quit. Like you were sent back home where you belonged, because women who were
Just
married, and I'm
didn't
not
do that.
talking when she got pregnant, but when she got married, that to me is astonishing. So I think my mom, even though I took it at the time, because it was coupled, I guess, with my father's dismissal that girls don't fly airplanes, I took it to be very negative. I think ultimately she was very proud of me. He never was, but I kind of lost that desire, not really completely. And then during my first marriage, as it was crumbling, my then husband had his father and his father's brother. So in other words, two brothers, his uncle and his father, both had airplanes. In fact, between them, they had 3 airplanes. That they were small airplanes. They had other careers, but this is what they did for fun, for avocation. And they were my father-in-law was particularly exciting. Anyway, so as our marriage was crumbling, one day my husband came home. His name is Paul, and he burst through the door and he said, "That's it, let's take flying lessons." And I was astonished, actually, because by then I had a reasonably good job with the Bank of Commerce. I was doing reasonably well, certainly very well for a female. And I just didn't think it was really even possible. And more than that, as I said, well, where are we going to take flying lessons? We were in southwestern Ontario in this little small town. Where are we going to take flying lessons? Oh, he said, I found an airport. It's just like, I don't know, 15 miles west of here. And oh, and by the way, I already booked introductory flights for us for the weekend.
Wow, we're doing this.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. And I was pretty hesitant, really. And in fact, my first flight was on March 17th. I know.
No way. Oh, wow.
The day, it was a Saturday that year, but 1947, 1979. And it was Saturday. And I was not terrified, but, I was pretty calm. It was an introductory flight, is what they actually called it. It was actually a loss leader. You could get an intro flight then for $10, which is ridiculous today.
Oh, wow.
You couldn't even start the engine.
I was going to say, that doesn't pay for gas, labor, anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So for $10, it was, 15, 20-minute flight, very short, obviously. And I don't know, maybe 10 minutes into the flight, the instructor said, he'd gone through a few of the maneuvers, pull back to climb, push forward to descend, roll it this way and you turn. He said, "So do you want to take control?" I was like, not a chance. So he sort of, you could sort of see that. Yeah, I figured, look at his face. And he, and I'm going to say this because I want to emphasize that he looked like a pilot. So when people say today to women, "You don't look like a pilot," it's because we've all got that idea of what
impression.
A pilot looks like. And he was, his posture was perfect, and he had a white crisp shirt and a blue tie and a blue jacket, which he didn't wear the jacket during the flight, but he had a blue jacket and crisp pleat in his pants, or knife edge pleat in his pants. It was just perfect. And sure enough, he got hired within a couple months by Air Canada. He was just waiting to go. But we still hear that today, that women, they might be the only person in the airplane. They land at an airport, they go in, they ask for fuel, and people say, "Well, where's the pilot?" Or, "Aren't you just keeping that seat warm?" So we still, unfortunately, some of us have that idea of, you don't really look like a pilot. Well, I certainly didn't feel like a pilot after 10 minutes, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So,
I was getting a little nervous.
Not a chance. No, not a chance. And so I kind of sensed that he was like, "Yeah, sure, here's the wife along with her husband," and he's kind of pushed her into doing it, which wasn't the case. It was his suggestion for sure, but he didn't push me. Anyway, I said, "But I will take control after a lesson." Or during an actual lesson where you I need to read a little bit about this and maybe get a good idea. I still like to have a good grasp of things before I go
jump right
somewhere.
in.
Right. I've got my book here lined up, but all along the other side, you can see a lot of rough guides and lonely planets. And I like to do a lot of research about wherever it is I'm going before I go. And in fact, when I moved to Mexico and I was lecturing about the Maya archaeological sites and the modern Maya, people would say, well, where did you get this information? And I said, well, first of all, I did go to many of these sites, but I certainly, even now, I can't claim to have gone to 500 Maya archaeological sites, maybe 100, but not 500. And I said, well, I read books. Funny
Amazing.
It's like, yeah. So I guess my mind is full of trivia, or important trivia, but full of stuff. So
I love it. I love it. So you've been breaking barriers for a long time. See, I didn't know you'd moved to Mexico, and I didn't know you had visited Mayan Mine. Like, I didn't know any of that. So you've just opened up a whole nother can of worms for us to explore, Lola. But before we do that, I do want to talk about the breaking of the barriers. And, clearly you're an advocate for women, and especially in roles where it's perceived. Those are male roles or roles for men. You've now released this book, Highway to the Sky. So let's dive into that. Let's talk about that and some of those experiences, because now you're trained. Now you're a aviation specialist, a pilot. What does that mean, and what prompted you to write the book?
Well, I always had a collection of stories in my mind. I'd written some of them down over the years, but I'd never, although I had published stuff, it was in niche publications about the Maya, so specific to the Maya, or travel magazines such as Verge Magazine, or the Globe and Mail published an article, a story about my time in Kenya, staying overnight with the Maasai. So I had kind of niche publications, but I'd never written a book. And I guess I sort of always wanted to, because I'd been writing since not all my life. Even though I was the editor of our grade 6 newspaper, that's about the earliest I had to do with writing. Unlike some people who say, "Oh, all I ever wanted to do was write, and I've been keeping a diary or a journal or whatever you want to call it." I was the editor of my newspaper all through high school and university. No, not me. But people, of course, would say, "Oh, you should write a book about your stories." So that was part of it. But the real impetus was when I realized that the issues of, or relating to, "You don't look like a pilot," were still very much alive and well. And I was not infrequently asked what I was going to be serving on the flight. Was I keeping the seat warm? Didn't I just borrow the jacket? Which actually was pretty funny. That was an offensive question asked by someone who should have known better. He had just finished telling me he was this, he didn't say he was an urbane traveler, but he'd just flown up, obviously from Toronto and obviously from Bay Street. He looked urbane. He was well-spoken and well-groomed. And I started to explain that, no, I wasn't going to be serving anything on the flight because I had to fly the airplane. And I started to explain, the stripes. And he said, "Oh, I know all about that. I fly all the time. Don't you remember? I just told you I fly all the time." Then he said, "Didn't you just borrow that jacket?" Like, he was just kept digging himself in deeper, which is odd because I have a curvaceous shape, and I actually had to go to a tailor to have my jacket made. So it fit my curvaceous shape. Unlike the guys who could go down to a specific tailor or an off-the-rack tailor, or whatever, I forget what it was called, tip-top tailors or something, and buy a suit that fit them that, is in the color of our airline. But I had to have mine specially made. So that was pretty obvious standing there on the ramp that I probably had, even if I had borrowed the jacket, I borrowed it from a female. not a guy. Anyway, that's still very typical. And what specific impetus was a letter written on airline, the little nappies they give you when they give out. Yeah. So a letter written to a WestJet captain, a female captain, that said, and I do paraphrase, that said, "Dear Captain WestJet, women have no place in the cockpit. We are short mothers and wives. When WestJet has another fair lady at the helm, I would like them to tell me in advance so I could take another flight."
Wow.
And that was in 2014.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. And at that point, I thought, this is insane. So what was great about her, about the letter, was what she was able to do with it. So before the internet, I couldn't do, if I'd received a letter like that, a note like that, what would I have done with it? I don't know, maybe taken it to the captain or our chief pilot, but what's he going to do with it? What are we really going to do with it? Well, what she did with it was she went to her chief pilot in the company, which I would have done. Then she went to her human resources, which we didn't have. Then she could have gone to, and I don't know if she did or not, the Human Rights Commission. I don't think it was applicable, but she could have done that, but I couldn't have, because it was just getting started.
The early
in the
days.
80s. And she also posted it on Facebook.
That's the killer.
I sure didn't have. And that's where I saw it. My
Yeah.
husband, actually, my now husband of 26 years, said, "You got to see this." And he had seen it, I don't know, on a newspaper, or in a newspaper article online. And I got it off Facebook. It was amazing.
Wow.
So that was the real impetus. So I wrote the book creating as much as possible a really positive slant that, yes, there are obstacles, yes, there will be obstacles, yes, there still exist obstacles, but if we treat them as not roadblocks, but things to be overcome, challenges,
opportunities,
that we eventually should be able to overcome them and at least achieve some measure of success. I also wrote it to reach out to women who are currently flying, who were flying commercially, or perhaps just as private pilots. I'm sure they got asked, "Where's the pilot?" just as much as anybody else. And to say that, in a way, to say that you're not alone, that others have been there, that they are there. And I was also encouraged by a friend of mine who said, "Oh, you can join these invitation-only Facebook groups." And I say invitation-only. They're not exactly that. You can be invited, but you can also apply to join and state your credentials. Why do you want to join a females-only female pilot Facebook group? Well, because I am a pilot and I've got 6,000 hours. Okay, great. You win. You can join us, that sort of thing. So they're not exactly invitation-only, but and I have found that people have said it's been validating, and I saw myself there. It's also been interesting. I wasn't sure how men would appreciate it, and so far it's been just as overwhelmingly positive. I got this
nice.
Yeah, it's great. I got this super long email from a man in Finland. That was amazing. Who said he'd been listening to a podcast I did a few months ago, the Aviation Geeks, and from America, and he ordered the book in Finland, and it was delivered to his local store. And I thought, wow, I have readers, a male reader, lots of male readers, but a male reader in Finland.
And he let you know, which is amazing.
Yeah, and his interest was certainly he's studying. I think he's got his commercial license, but he has 4 daughters, and that often changes men's mind.
Yes,
they may not be able to see their wives as pilots, but then they look at their daughters and think, "Oh, she's so smart. Oh, maybe she'll grow up and be a secretary." And I'm not trying to criticize secretaries. My mom was a secretary, but those were what are called forced choice careers. You could be a secretary, a nurse, but not a doctor, or rarely a doctor.
Or work in a factory.
Yeah, work in a factory. Yeah, be sort of line work. You could be a stewardess, as that's what they were called, but not likely a pilot. And Nothing wrong with any of those. Or you could be a homemaker and have, be a wife and mother. Very traditional. And, spoiler alert, I do know how to cook. I can clean my own house. Um, but that isn't what I wanted to be.
Yeah.
I just wanted something more. I wanted something more exciting that I thought exciting.
Yeah.
If you're happy being at home, being a mother, being a wife, I'm happy. It works for me.
And it's a hard job.
Oh,
it's
gosh.
one of the hardest.
Go out to work.
No, seriously. I actually said that after I had my first one. I was like, how long do I go back to work? Because it's the hardest job ever. But something you brought up there, Lola, I think is super important. Like there's a number of things I want us to get into, but something you brought up there, I love that you took the step to write the book and talk about the experience as a female pilot, as one of the first females in aviation and doing the work that you were doing. And this stereotypes that happen where people have expectations that it should be a certain look. And we see that happening with doctors. We see that happening in legal. We see that happening in finance. Like I hear this a lot, technology. This comes up a lot in even my coaching clients where, I find it very hard to get promoted because I'm in this male dominated, or I get excluded from events because I'm a female. And so 2025 highlighting these things, it's shocking that we're still dealing with this, but the reality of it is we are, right? And it's how and when are we going to see that paradigm start to shift and change? Because I'm raising my kids both to believe they can do and be whatever they choose and want to be, right? So when will we start to see some of that shift happen?
I don't know. I think in some cases it has. So I'm speaking tomorrow and then Wednesday to Mohawk College in the aviation department. So I've done a lot of outreach. I've done outreach to the Canadian Owners and Pilots Association, and both of those and specifically on the aviation geeks. A lot of men have been interviewing me and asking me to speak.
Nice.
So there is a change. They don't say, we don't want a woman talking about aviation. Far from it. They're encouraging me. So that in itself is encouraging. And we also need more toys, more media involvement.
Yes. Which is why I wanted you to come on the podcast. Oh, I love it. I love it.
Barbie. So I played with Barbie dolls. Strangely, I never played with many baby dolls, but that was fine. I played with Barbie and I love Barbie, but her options then were looking absolutely glamorous, or getting ready for bed, in this beautiful chignon or whatever, or cooking.
Yeah.
Cooking was very important for Barbie. And all of those things are still important, but so is being Captain Barbie.
Yeah.
And there's also pediatrician Barbie that comes with twins, which is so cute. But so many varieties of Barbie to show that she can be a doctor, a dentist, a pilot. There are changes, but that's one thing, more visibility. Now in 1979, even growing up as a teenager, I didn't even know we had a local airport near me, and it was local, and it was tiny, and it was a grass field, and it was privately owned. So it wasn't well advertised, I'm sure, but I could have taken flying lessons had I thought about it, had I, known more about it. But now we do a lot of outreach. A lot of the flying schools, the flying clubs will do outreach. They'll have special Girls in Aviation Days. COPA, the Canadian Owners and Pilots Association, has aviation days for boys and girls, and then also for girls. I organized an event in conjunction with the Prince Edward Flying Club in Picton. I organized an event in 2023 that was called Find Your Wings. And it was at an airport and it said wings, but I also invited the firefighters, and the women came, and which was great, the female firefighters, and then the cops who came, the OPP came, and invited, and again, all the women came, and it was super. I mean, it was wonderful. So I wanted them to see that, yeah, they could be pilots. They could also talk to schools and colleges. And there's a lot of events like that, that include not just aviation related careers, but non not aviation, but STEM careers.
Yeah.
So the colleges will come down, and sure, they're going to talk about aviation because that's really the theme. But obviously, you've made that connection with a college or a university, and here's my booklet, or here's the booklet about our college and what you can learn at our college. And there's so many different options. So it's just a good way, not just for the girls, and we encourage, even if it was Girls in Aviation Day or Girls Take Flight, Girls Fly Too. There's some in Oshawa, in Toronto, in Waterloo. The next one is in Waterloo at the Waterloo Wellington Airport on May 10th. And some of these events actually include flights for girls that are free, which is really fun. But we encourage families to come, because even though women who are involved in aviation, we go to conferences, but we already know what the issues are. We need to talk to the public, talk to schools, go on podcasts like this, talk about the fact that women can do these things. Not every woman wants to fly an airplane, just like not every man wants to fly an airplane. My husband is a wonderful doctor. He does not want to fly airplanes. He doesn't even really want to fly in airplanes, but I've dragged him around again. What the heck?
It's all good, honey. Well, and so what I heard you say earlier, and it's so funny when you were talking about, you mentioned Mexico, and then you mentioned Kenya. And I had this vision of you with like an Indiana Jones hat on, like a real adventurer, right? And I'm sorry that a different name or a woman adventurer didn't come to my head, but Indiana Jones is what came to my head. And I bring that up because your background, like, you've talked about so many things, right? Like being able to lecture, go to over 100 different locations and studying this. But you also, and what caught my attention was the fact that you are a scuba dive master. And so clearly internally, there is this adventurous spirit about you. And so given what you shared about your mom, your dad, where does that come from?
Well, they were not really interested in having children, but they stood right up to the plate, and they took us on holidays. They broadened our horizons with, Life magazine, National Geographic, educational shows. They took us to Stratford. The Shaw Festival didn't exist when I was growing up, but they took us to Stratford Festival. We traveled all over Canada. I went to Newfoundland. We went to Newfoundland and also into America. And they were great. They took us, they arranged for us to have figure skating lessons and tap and baton. So they were really good parents in terms of doing the right things. There wasn't a lot of love there, but they did the right things. And for that, I'm grateful. The book is not a story of, oh, how terrible my parents were. And
oh no, I didn't take it that way. No, I was more about like where that adventurous spirit comes from.
I think my mom. Now, even my dad, though, he was born out west, but wanted to join the military for World War II, wanted to become a pilot like every man who joined the military, I'm sure, but had a hearing loss in one ear, so was disqualified. But anyway, he became an aircraft maintenance engineer and met my mom in Trenton, Ontario, and she also loved to travel. And she got that from her father, who, because my parents both worked, my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, looked after me. And even as a young child, when I was a young child, my grandmother was very sedentary. Yes, she was busy, but she was in the house. She was reading or knitting or crocheting, cross-stitching, making supper. She baked pie for lunch, pie for supper. She was a wonderful.
Wow.
Whereas Grandpa was outside and he was doing really cool science things or talking about trees or plants or animals. And guess where I was? I was
Yeah.
outside with
Yeah.
Grandpa.
That curiosity was like, let me in there.
Yes. And he erected his a tent on the front yard, which was on the bay shore, and we would camp out there during the day and sometimes at night too. And Grandma was also an adventurous camper, I think. Although I'm not sure, but I kind of think she was dragged there by my grandfather. But we traveled again all across Canada and then down into United States. So it was I think they instilled that in me as well. And we didn't just travel. I mean, we tented, we trailered, we went to museums. We learned about where we were going. My parents were rock hounds. My dad was a gemologist. And so one trip we did was in Parsborough in Nova Scotia, and they were researching the dinosaur tracks and stuff there. So, and I say researching, they were not research scientists, no, but that's what they were interested in. So we
That's what I was
learned
going to
all
say.
about the dinosaurs when we were there. So it was a really they were educational trips. We went to the ROM, we went, I don't think the Science Center existed, but the ROM, we went to the ROM later as an adult. I went to the Science Center and stuff too. So they were very forward thinking that way.
Yeah. Well, and so what I hear from that, and what I would invite our listeners to think about, is how that exposure can shape the future. Right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
yeah. And you just shared like these different ways, instead of sitting in, well, back then, of course, that we didn't have the computers. I mean, we didn't have them when I was growing up either. But it's that not being so focused on watching TV and sitting, behind a screen, but it was more about actually getting out, getting involved, touching, feeling, being curious and exploring. And so what it sounds like, you've certainly brought that into adulthood with all the many different things that you've done. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of who we become and who we're being when we take that time to reflect on what has made us who we are today.
Absolutely. I mentioned Sky King, the show on TV that I watch on Radio 1. So the other show that I loved, and not once when I was watching either of these shows did I think, oh, I'm going to grow up and be a pilot. The second show was Sea Hunt. And he was a scuba diver. And I don't know if you've seen that one or even heard of it. It was Lloyd Bridges, who's the dad.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Jeff Bridges and Beau Bridges. And I certainly didn't think, oh, I'm going to grow up and be a scuba diver or a scuba dive master. I love the show, but he was a guy. I don't think I thought about that. Even interestingly enough, though, when people say, oh, what was it like? Did you think you were being a pioneer aviator? It was like, no, I just wanted to fly.
Just wanted my wings.
Yeah. It wasn't like, I'm going to go flying and I'm going to do, I don't know, break some kind of boundary. It was like, wow, this is really fun. I love it. I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to become a commercial pilot. That was obviously a conscious decision, because there's a lot of studying involved and flight tests and advanced medicals. Medical or physical exams. But I certainly didn't think about that. I didn't internalize that I was, as a young child, going to become a scuba diver or a pilot. And I certainly didn't think about breaking any boundaries particularly. Yeah. It was interesting, though, when my ex-husband and I showed up at the airport for that first flight, and for every flight thereafter, we brought our 3-year-old son, and I was the only female. Maybe once there was a girlfriend, but generally I was the only female there involved in flying. I mean, of course, even our son was male, right?
Yeah.
And I don't really remember that. And yet when I had a developmental editor, she was great, because she'd say, well, what made that unusual? Or, I was talking about our flight out west in 1962, and she's like, okay, well, that's really good. Well, what else can you add that sets us in that time frame? Oh, my mother chain smoked the whole flight, both flights, all 4 flights. So, and you certainly can't do that today. But it was quite normal then.
Yeah.
Maybe not chain smoking, but certainly it was quite acceptable.
No, I can remember some commercial flights going from the east part of the US to Hawaii, and it was nonstop smoking. And there was a non-smoking section at the front of the plane, but it was like, why?
Yeah.
It's all like we're in one capsule.
It is, exactly. Yeah.
So what I take from this, Lola, and I'm just cognizant of our time, what I take from this is this message that you can be anything that you decide to be. And whatever is driving you internally, don't let other people take that away from you. You figure out what that is and make it happen.
And there will be naysayers, there will be people that challenge you, but if you're qualified, if you're passionate and determined and qualified, to take the time, the years to get a university degree or postgraduate degrees or your airline transport rating, you are qualified. You're tested annually. You're tested by different people. You're tested in aviation. You're tested on every aircraft type that you fly on. So it's not like, you get your commercial license and they send you off into the wild blue yonder and you're never, ever tested again. You're tested annually by different people. By Transport Canada or Federal Aviation Authority. You're tested constantly, or it feels like that anyhow. And you're not just tested on can I take off and land. You do all kinds of emergency procedures that hopefully you'll never ever have in real life. So there will be barriers, there'll be naysayers, but if you're qualified, you are qualified and you have as much right to be there. Sometimes finding your own niche, it's hard. It's lonely. It can be very lonely. In my case, there were never any other females that I worked with until the very last couple months. But I didn't necessarily bond with them. They were just very different people. There wasn't anything wrong with them, just very different people. But you have to choose your allies, like seek allies, choose your allies. And you mentioned this earlier in the conversation that you may be left out, not necessarily intentionally, but a bunch of the guys will say, hey, Joe, let's go down to the bar and watch the strippers. Well, you're probably not going to even want to go, but maybe.
Never know.
You never know. That's right. Or hey guys, let's go down to the bar and watch football. Like I would never want to do that.
Oh, I'd be right up for that. I love football.
No problem. But also be prepared that you're working as a professional, and the only thing you may have in common is your profession. So build on that and build on someone who is encouraging you, obviously. But just because there's another female or there's another Black person, they may not necessarily be your best ally. Maybe they are. That would be great, but not necessarily. So every situation is different too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need motivation. You need to be courageous because there'll be days when
it's tough.
You just want to pack it all in or go home crying or whatever.
And that's okay. Do it, but then pick yourself up and let's go do it again.
That's right. Just keep on trying. Keep going.
So Lola, because I want to just circle back to the book, because I know you're like, number 38 on Amazon?
Was. It's moved around a bit. It's up and down. But for the last couple of weeks in February and then the first 2 in March, it was in the top 100 on Amazon.com's Aviation and Nautical Biographies, which actually amazed me. I mean, yes, I worked hard. Yes, I took university courses. I went to Gotham Writers. I went to Wesleyan University. And finally, I went to the University of Toronto in their creative writing department. I worked hard. Yes, I deserve it, but you never know what's going
to resonate.
Right. What's going to resonate? Who is it going to resonate with? Will it resonate with anybody? One of my profs had actually said, nobody wants to read about female pilots, which I remember thinking, well, that's kind of interesting because that's my topic, but okay.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. That's like, but again, I was determined. I knew there was some kind of a niche, whether it's a big niche, I don't know. There are no vampires in it, so it's no sci-fi, and I know those are popular genres right now. It is a true story. I contemplated writing it as fiction. There are probably more fiction readers than there are memoir readers, but some of it was just so, I thought it was just so out there and unusual in the sense that it happened more than once. I mean, it wasn't just one person who was opposed. It wasn't just men. There were men and women who were equally shocked. The women too thought, you don't look like a pilot.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up, because that comes up more often than not, even with my coaching clients, where sometimes the bad or tough leader they have, not tough as in driving them, but not supportive, it can often be a female. And so, it's being very open and transparent about, okay, so what's happening here? Right?
Yeah. I don't know. I know it's tempting to say they feel jealous, they feel threatened. One now retired female employee of a major airline was approached at a conference for women in aviation. She was approached by an older female pilot who never flew commercially, but had a pilot's license. And she was very angry with my friend. At first, my friend thought she was going to be congratulated by this older woman saying, yay, you did it. In fact, what the older woman said was, you took that job from my son who needed it.
Oh, interesting.
Wow. Right.
Wow.
Isn't it? So that wasn't a recent occurrence. I do want to emphasize that. But the fact that it occurred at all is amazing. So here you have a woman who's not allied with another woman trying to get ahead, but in fact sees her as a threat because she in fact did take the job that belonged to her son. So it's a very complex situation. Part of it's perhaps jealousy or...
well, some of that too comes from this person residing in a place of scarcity.
Right.
Because when we believe that if you win, I lose,
correct,
we are not in an abundant type mindset, right? I mean, the reality of it is there's enough for all of us.
That's right. And it also has something to do with numbers. So if you have a female who is a supervisor and one female comes along, visually, they look like they should be allies. But they may or may not be. And that's what I was sort of suggesting earlier, that you may be in your profession, I don't know, as a computer scientist, another woman comes along, maybe you'll be friends, but maybe not. But when other women join, it changes the demographics. And then men start to listen in a different way, because it's not just a token female, whether or not they think she's been hired inappropriately. That's still a token female or a soul female, if whatever you, perhaps that's a better word, an individual female. And I was reading this book where there was a woman who was the only female at the board meeting, and they were having a special speaker, and the speaker never addressed her, asked questions of the other attendees who were male. And then at the end, he went around the boardroom and shook everybody's hand, but not hers, assuming that she, I guess, was the secretary. And I read just recently too, this was at a dinner party for couples, and the women were constantly being interrupted by the men. So one of them decided that every time she was interrupted, she was going to slap the table. And they realized what she was doing. The women realized what she was doing. And it was happening constantly. So we need to be more vocal. We need to say, excuse me, you're interrupting me. We need to make ourselves less subordinate. And we need to change the way we raise children, not just little girls, but little boys.
Both, yes, for sure.
I still I heard last week, oh, he's just acting like a boy. It's like, what
does that mean? Yeah.
That mean?
Well, you're absolutely right on that. And, these are human dynamics, not men and women. It's not isolating one or the other, but these are human dynamics.
Correct.
and learning how to use your voice to express, just like this woman, the example you gave about her hitting the table every time it happened, it is being vocal, not in a nasty way, but just saying, oh, wow, I'm sorry, but I wasn't finished talking, or thanks for expanding on my comment there. I really appreciate that's what I teach a lot of women to do, especially when you're sitting at a management table.
That's excellent. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Well, because
expanding on what I was speaking about.
Yeah. Well, right. And because then that person steps back and says, oh, I did interrupt. Right. Because sometimes it's not even conscious.
Correct.
And so helping that person realize, and then you can have a sidebar conversation later to say, so John, I notice every time we're in a meeting, you tend to interrupt what I'm saying. And so I'm just curious, where's that coming from? Like, I could think maybe you want to be an ally and you're supporting and expanding on my message because you think people aren't hearing me. So I'm curious why you think that. Or you're just being an A and you're overspeaking me, right? So if that's the case, then let's talk about why you feel you need to do that. Is there insecurity we need to talk about? Like really, really having that transparent conversation to understand, because every human being, we all have a story in our head.
Yes.
And we make assumptions that are not always true. And so it is paramount you do the due diligence to find out what is the intent of that situation. So that's my little rant.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And there is a tendency too, and this is historically documented, that a woman will make a suggestion that will be maybe not ignored, but not accepted. And then a man
say the same thing.
A similar, almost identical suggestion. It's like, John, that's fantastic. What a great idea. And it's like, wait a minute. I'm sure I said that like 2 seconds ago.
And that's why you have to correct that, Lola. That's why you say, oh, John, thanks for expanding. Or, oh, John, I'm so glad that you're in agreement with what I just said. Like, let's open it up to the group. How do we expand on this? How do we, right? Because you're taking your power back. And that is a very pivotal moment, especially as a woman, especially as a leader sitting at the table.
Right.
You're taking your power back, and you're doing it in a way that is not malicious. You're doing it in a way that is not in the same vein of how that person is doing it, but it's okay. Now let's all talk about, like, do we all agree? Like, where are we with that thinking? Right.
That's excellent.
Anyway. Yes.
No, that's absolutely right. And that's great in a boardroom situation. It's a little bit more difficult in an aircraft situation where you've
100%.
got 2 people, and most likely, but not always, the senior person would be a male, just because of the fact that men have been flying
seniority
commercially as commercial pilots longer than women. Yes, we do have quite a few female captains these days, but the numbers are still ridiculously low in terms of captains or first officers on major airlines. The international world average for female commercial pilots is 4.7%.
Wow.
That's incredibly low, incredibly low. About 12% of women will start taking flying lessons. So there's even quite a disconnect between the 12% that start and, let's say, the 5% that wind up being commercial pilots.
Wow, that's a staggering statistic.
It is staggering, absolutely. Wow. And I think what we're talking about too obviously applies not just to airlines, but to any STEM career,
100%.
any corporate environment. We need to be more forthcoming and stand up for ourselves, take our power back.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. That's a great way to wrap up our episode today, Lola. And thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for breaking barriers and opening doors. And like, seriously, I mean, you've been doing some incredible work, and I'm grateful that you came on the show and shared with us. And audience, you can get her book on Amazon. I'm assuming any local bookstore. So it's Highway to the Sky, Lola Reid Allin.
There we go.
And those of you who are on visual, you can see the book, but those of you on audio, again, it's Highway to the Sky.
Right. Actually, we also need to put An Aviator's Journey, because apparently there is another book called Highway to the Sky.
There you go. An Aviator's Journey.
It is available on Amazon.com.ca, but as well as Indigo, Barnes & Noble. you may not be able to walk into your local independent bookstore and there it is.
But they can order it.
Maybe, but yes, absolutely. You can order
they can order it for you. And we like supporting local.
Yeah, exactly. And it's published by Simon & Schuster, so you can order directly from them too. So
perfect.
It's widely available. And I appreciate Vicki being on the show. I've had a great time.
Oh, good. And thank you. Thank you for bringing your beautiful energy. And I want to thank our audience for being here. We know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to. Listen, I'm going to ask you this again, because getting your ratings, sharing this, that means the world to us, because that's how we continue to grow the podcast. So please do give us a like. Let us know what you think. And as a gift to you, if you visit the Women in Leadership Empowered website, we have a free leadership quiz that you can take. This gives you a lot of insight as to how you're showing up as a leader. So take 5 minutes. That's all it's going to take you, and it'll give you a lot of insight. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Lola, thank you again, and thank you for all the work you're doing advocating for women, and also just getting that message out there about aviation. I think that's a huge message.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I enjoy doing it, and it's been great chatting.
Well, thank you, and we will see you again in the very near future. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for WIL Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.wilempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.